being uh, dying in prison or being exiled to Tasmania or uh, being sentenced to death or being killed by police, right? Unlike the suffragettes, who got their own wing in the prison with hot and cold running water. But uh, you sort of we don't ever hear about that. We hear that these were brave women who put their own lives on the line, right, to earn you the right to have a voice. Bullshit.
Well, never mind their classism. I mean, they didn't want the lower class women getting these rights.
Of course not. And on top of that, they had voices all the way through, right? They convinced most of the US to seriously consider, I think they happened almost concurrently, the two amendments, women's suffrage and prohibition. The prohibition amendment may have occurred after, I forget, but all of the all of the lobbying happened before women's suffrage. Um, all of that stuff, those women had voices in their society. Those women had every right to speak their mind. They were writing editorials in the paper and letters to the editor and all kinds of stuff. When you're looking at a newspaper article from 1910 and it's written by a woman lawyer, right? Oh, 60 years before feminists came along and earned women the right to an education, right? Like it's all a fucking load of shit. And because the documentation is there, right? All this you can pull up these newspaper stories. You can pull up all of this information. Here's that New York Times article from 1910, right? And it's so much easier to prove to people that they've been lied to about feminism.
But even so, I mean, when you're talking to Cenk, and I also watched another interview you did with God, what's that guy's name? He runs a progressive.
Pac-Man.
Yeah, man,
I've
that
actually
guy was just
his
so
show.
deflective, and I
Oh yeah,
watched
I'm
it.
going back on his show on the 25th,
Oh, have fun.
to have a discussion with him and a feminist.
Yeah, but see, what are what are the chances that you're going to be able to convince people of that sort, that ilk, or the Jenks of the world? I mean,
It's not so much convincing Cenk, but if you go to that video,
I will
and I
later.
can I
Yeah.
can send the link later, but and you go and read the comments and you look at the downvote ratio, that vote downvote ratio, and there were even people saying, usually I'm a fan of the Young Turks. Why were you yelling? You totally went Bill O'Reilly. She was actually saying some interesting things, and I wanted to hear what she had to say.
A lot of that might have to do with the fact that you're a woman. Let's not
Of
forget that,
course, of
because
course, of
he was
course
a
it does.
guy being quote unquote aggressive, at least in tone,
Yeah.
towards a woman. Yeah.
Well, and it came on the heels. He did a very long, I think it was 3 hours, interview with Sam Harris.
I watched that. Oh my, yeah, it was awful.
And
I'm
so
a,
people were already primed to not be happy with his
yeah.
debate style.
Yeah,
So
it was awful, and I'm someone who I'd say Sam Harris is one of my top three public favorite intellectuals, and it
I
was
do.
terrible. It was a waste of his time, I think, overall.
Oh, it was. Well, but it wasn't in the sense that so many of Chang's viewers recognized that he was being unreasonable, right? And so, I mean, you sort of look at that, like I'm not there to convince Chang. I'm not there to convince David Pakman. And although David Pakman is way more freaking unbiased than most of his
The
viewers.
interview you need to do, I would love to see it, is an interview with Sam Harris because there was one incident with, I'm sure you know Sam Harris, Four
Yes.
Horsemen and all that.
Yeah.
He got accused by a feminist of being,
Mm.
misogynist, blah blah blah, and then he wrote this response, and it was
Oh, I
just,
read that.
it was weird. It was like what he said literally. What did he say? He said, I respect women more than men. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but I just do. Just weird things that are uncharacteristically irrational for him, and
Yeah.
he's
Well, but he like this is the way it is. I mean, like even look at Steven Pinker and the better angels of our
but
natures,
I
right?
just
Like the
I
woman.
finally got the order the book. I'm picking up tomorrow. I'm gonna read it.
Well, that like I've listened to How the Mind Works on audio. I've read most of the Blank Slate.
I read
I
Blank
don't
Slate
know
twice.
whether I
Yeah.
want to pick up Better Angels of Our Natures because I just
Well, speaking of the blank slate, that was I I just can't figure out what his thing is because he has this whole chapter, as you know, where he's
mm,
talking. He actually cites women sociologists saying, maybe women don't want to get in, these engineering fields or whatever.
yeah.
But the preface of it, if I recall, paraphrasing, is something along the lines of blah 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 blah, and thousands of years of oppression, and so he
Yeah.
has to fit that in, and
Oh, so
then
does so many people that I sort of respect. Christina Hoff Sommers, I've heard her say that. Well, of
well,
course,
what
women
is
will
your take on her?
contribute to
Because
oppression.
she calls herself an equity feminist, which is I don't know.
Well, she's definitely conservative
Yeah, yeah.
in most of her politics, and um, I think she's sort of a very good middle ground. She's a little bit of a gateway drug in that sense to looking at the issues a little differently, at least the contemporary
I think
issues.
she's better than nothing. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But I still think that she's sort of living under the impression that women were sort of arbitrarily historically oppressed, and they were
Yeah,
kept out of
yeah.
this and that for no
But
reason.
the
So,
question is, do these people believe it? Because when Steven Pinker writes that in, say, The Blank Slate, I'm thinking, this dude is fucking super smart. There's no way. And he researches everything so meticulous. There's no way he actually believes this. He's just doing this to appease
I
the
hope that
fembots.
that's the case, and you might find out if when you read Better Angels of Our Nature whether that is the case. But he may one of the things that I've talked about a lot, at least in comments, is particularly in comments on mainstream articles. So, the Daily Caller or, the Weekly Standard or whatever, right? Like, which is where I've been spending most of my time lately is places other than the Manosphere and just leaving comments. And what what I find really upsetting is that when we study aggression, right? We're almost always studying direct aggression, right? And we're not studying the ways that women are aggressive. We're not
Mm.
studying so yeah, boys are rough and tumble, and boys will get into shoving matches and stuff like that, and that's boy aggression, and it's very obvious, right? Whereas a girl will um, run up to someone, an adult, and say a boy was picking on her, whether he was or he wasn't. And then that boy is punished. And that's not seen as aggression as well.
Never mind the verbal malice that can come from women. I mean, neurologically speaking, there's not a huge difference. I mean, we do
No.
say sticks and stones can, but that's bullshit. I mean, words can hurt, and women can be viciously
Oh, brutal.
aggressive
They're
in that
just
manner.
fucking brutal. And, so, I mean, you sort of look at the way aggression plays out. And then if we were to add on top of all of the relational aggression that girls seem to come by naturally, and men tend to they sort of learn how to do it through just trial and error and experience. I don't think it comes naturally to them so much, but it's becoming more and more common among men in the workplace now, um, in adulthood. But you sort of look at that and you add it all up and you compare it against male aggression. Well, what if we were to add up things like false accusations, which are the majority of false accusations are made by women and made against men, right? And this is, anything domestic violence, abuse, child sexual abuse, about 80% of false accusations are made by women. And if I were to smack my boyfriend around and like tie his hands and lock him in the tool shed for 3 days, I'd be guilty of like a whole bunch of felonies. And if I were to hire some thug to do it for me, right, I'd be guilty of all those felonies plus criminal conspiracy, right? But if I call the cops and say he's hitting me, and then the cops come and rough him up and slap some cuffs on him and shove him in a cell for 3 days, I'm just guilty of filing a false police report, and that's not seen as aggression.
Well,
but
it's a
that's what it
traditional
is.
proxy power and hypoagency
Abs-
thing at work.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, but we don't see that as aggression, and it absolutely, absolutely is. So, if we were to add all of that in there, I have to wonder which of the sexes is more aggressive than the other.
And I just have to wonder about
Because,
these academics because, I mean, full disclosure, I've been for a while now because I've been so involved in my own reading up on Evo Psych. Actually, been considering going for a PhD, a doctoral degree in evolutionary psychology. I don't have an official background in it, but I've done so much reading. Maybe I could find some way to segue into it.
yeah.
And one of the major obstacles, apart from being living on the street because you can't earn a living with that shit, is just if I were to do that, the kind of research I want to do, I want to be honest. I don't want to fucking put up a front saying, well, with some sort of, precursor saying, or pretext, well, we know that women were oppressed, but no, I just want to, what I'd like to do is take a lot of the data, some of the data that's been talked about in MGTOW, talk about divorce rates, talk about all these details and how it applies cross culturally and maybe actually put some of the stuff that has been talked about in the manosphere in an official academic context, well researched, of course, hopefully. I don't know if that's permissible. I don't know if that could even get off the ground. So that's one thing that always makes me think twice about that.
I think that it's the tiny percentage of highly, highly rational women who are going to have to crack that nut
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
you
Because I
know,
would just be a misogynist probably for doing that.
yeah, and I mean there are a few out there who there's just a blog, WordPress blog called Darwinian Gender Studies.
Yeah, I read that, Karen, but my issue with that is she still had this whole feminine, she still was going
Yes.
on about the oppression bullshit.
Oh yeah. But I mean, you look at it, here's the thing, even with that caveat, oh, well, of course women were oppressed through history. Evo Psych is really not very flattering to women at all.
No, no,
It
no.
it exposes all of the sort of the nitty gritty, ugly underbits, and all of the sort of not quite sweet and sunshine motivations that women have, and the ways that they behave that are that we don't want to look at. Even if it doesn't necessarily go at it quite as brutally as we might like, brutally honestly. It still exposes them, and I think this is
Yeah.
one of the
Well, that's
reasons.
also one of the reasons why you'll always hear, oh,
Oh,
Evil Psych's a bunch of bullshit. And I
yeah,
always say, what's the fucking alternative? Your pseudo history with the
yeah,
feminist
exactly.
perspective? I mean,
Oh God, like it's the most scientific field of explaining human behavior that we have,
yeah,
um, and or that we're probably capable of. And
yeah.
when I was reading Male Female: The Evolution of Human Sex Differences by David Gary, one of the things he said in his preface was, I I have always found it absolutely strange that we study the behavioral differences of every single species on the planet through an evolutionary lens, except for ourselves, right? We don't do that with
Too
ourselves.
scary.
It is. It's
Honestly,
really,
Karen, between you and me, I honestly think that Evo Psych should be a mandatory fucking subject in schools. I think it should be like biology. Oh, I got Evo Psych at 2 o'clock. Because
yeah.
how else are people gonna understand their behavior beyond all the rationalizations they give themselves? I mean, understanding the difference between, say, ultimate cause and distal and proximate and things like that.
Well, I mean,
Uh,
and it's so easy to explain something that's non-controversial, right? Like, we like salty foods, we like fatty foods, we like sweet foods.
yeah,
And the reason why we like those things and sort of eat them compulsively, is because we lived in a different set of circumstances for most of our evolution, and the people that acquired a taste for those things survived better and had a better chance of passing on their genes, right? So uncontroversial because we can see the health negatives of those things. So we can see them on paper, we can see them on charts that scale trends of obesity and type 2 diabetes and tooth decay and all kinds of stuff. mean, I still remember in the movie Never Cry Wolf, um, the Inuit guy who was guiding the white dude Farley Mowat wrote about it. He smiles and his teeth are all rotted, and he said, and oh my goodness, your teeth. And he says, well, this is what happens when a meat eater becomes a sugar eater. Um, so we can see all of those negatives. They're the very black and white negatives. When it comes to sex differences or racial differences, or ethnic differences, we don't want to think that the the we don't want to think that there's any difference at all.
Yeah, which is ludicrous. I mean, the problem, part of the problem, I think, and I've encountered this, and you have as well, is that when you describe something, sometimes you describing something is also is somehow interpreted as you being pro or for it. Like for
Yeah.
example, I'm actually working on a video on violence in the context of obedience. I'm sure you have Stanley Milgram experiments, stuff like that. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm going to have to offer a disclaimer saying no, I don't support any of the things I'm describing because people tend to do that. Now, if you say that there are differences between the sexes or there are differences between the races, then there's always some sort of negative ascribed to them. I think that tends mostly to come from liberal people, left wing people. They think
Yeah.
if you acknowledge something is then to automatically take the worst from it. Which doesn't have to be the case. I just think it's more honest doing that. You don't have
Well,
to. Yeah.
if you acknowledge it, then you're obviously going to use it to justify
Right, right.
discriminating against individuals.
Right, and there's no doubt that there are historical cases where people have used differences to justify things, but if you try to stay rational, there's no need to do that. I think, and you can there's no for example you can say that generally speaking men are more spatially oriented and you'll find fewer women engineers. But in the case of your own daughter, right? She's mathematically gifted, and she kind of, as by your own acknowledgement, kind of sucks at the whole interaction social thing, right?
Social thing, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, there are
Definitely.
anomalies, and nothing's preventing her from going into engineering if she wants to do that. I mean, it's all cool. It's
Yeah.
and offering a general description of trends and differences between the sexes isn't going to change the individual fact of your daughter's own abilities. And people don't get that. That they think that then if I say that or you say that, oh, that you're saying your daughter can't do this. No, because we're talking about general trends here, and they don't
Yeah.
get that. So
Yeah,
yeah.
no, and they don't get that the